According to NPR, a new set of court filings has revealed that Palantir is once again at the center of a high-stakes controversy, this time involving the improper sharing of sensitive Medicaid data with U.S. immigration authorities. In this episode, we are going to unpack what happened, what it means for Palantir as a business, and how long-term investors might want to think about the risk-reward trade-off when a company's growth is tightly linked to government surveillance and enforcement work. According to NPR News, the core of the story is this: Medicaid officials at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, improperly shared data on millions of people with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE. That alone is a serious privacy breach. But the filings go further and state that ICE then passed that data on to Palantir, which operates a product called Elite, a data analytics tool that helps ICE agents identify addresses of non-citizens who may be subject to deportation. For Palantir investors, this is not just a political story or a legal technicality. It directly touches on brand risk, regulatory risk, and ultimately revenue durability. Palantir has built a sizable part of its public sector business on exactly this kind of mission-critical data integration and analytics. When that data turns out to be improperly obtained, the backlash can threaten contracts, invite tighter rules, and damage the company's reputation with both governments and private clients. NPR mentions that this controversy is playing out inside an existing lawsuit. More than 20 Democratic state attorneys general previously sued the Trump administration over the data-sharing arrangement between CMS and ICE. A federal judge, Vince Chabria in California, allowed some limited sharing of Medicaid data related to certain immigrants without lawful status, including addresses, birth dates, and immigration status, but clearly restricted what could be shared and who could be included. From an investor's perspective, that judicial framework matters. Palantir's government products exist within a moving legal and political boundary. If courts narrow what data can be used, or impose stricter safeguards and audit requirements, Palantir's implementation costs go up, compliance risk rises, and some use cases may become less commercially attractive or even off-limits. According to NPR, CMS nevertheless sent ICE data in January that went beyond what the court had permitted. One Minnesota dataset on refugees included U.S. citizens, and another massive dataset transferred in early January contained information on millions of people, including those lawfully in the country. ICE was supposed to delete that improperly shared data. From a portfolio lens, think about what this implies. First, Palantir's products are being used in highly sensitive domains where the line between legitimate law enforcement and civil liberties violations can be thin and contested. Second, the company is dependent on upstream data suppliers here, CMS and ICE, whose own compliance failures can splash back onto Palantir even if Palantir did not initiate the overreach. That is classic counterparty and reputational risk. The judge in this case temporarily paused the CMS-ICE data sharing for immigration enforcement in late May after the improper transfers came to light. For Palantir, any prolonged pause or permanent narrowing of data flow could reduce the value and usage of its Elite platform inside ICE, and over time it could influence contract sizes or expansions. NPR reports that despite the earlier incident and deletion instructions, federal officials have now admitted to additional improper data sharing. CMS inadvertently reshared that massive January dataset with ICE while trying to transmit information from states not involved in the lawsuit. That raises an important point for investors. Technical and operational complexity in large federal agencies is high. Mistakes happen. But when Palantir is embedded as a core analytics engine, every data mistake risks being magnified into a political and legal headache in which Palantir becomes part of the headline. From a risk analysis angle, this suggests several things. First, Palantir's government work is sticky in a technical sense but not necessarily bulletproof politically. Agencies rely heavily on the software once it's integrated, but Congress, courts, where the White House can abruptly change what data can be used and how. That can force contract rewrites, delays, or stricter oversight that eats into margins. Second, this case highlights the asymmetry between upside and downside on certain government surveillance contracts. The immediate upside is revenue and growing footprint inside agencies like ICE and DHS. The downside is that any scandal, especially involving health data and immigration enforcement, can trigger broad pushback not only from civil liberties organizations but also from state governments that are clients or gatekeepers in other lines of business. According to NPR, ICE officials say they deleted the file in question and did not use it for law enforcement purposes. However, after an internal search, ICE found that roughly half a dozen users still held copies of the dataset. In a court declaration, a section chief at ICE acknowledged that it is technologically difficult to guarantee every possible copy has been found and removed, while promising continued good faith efforts to delete any remaining versions. For investors, that detail is crucial. The official explanation underscores how deeply integrated these datasets are within complex systems. Think about how Palantir's platforms are designed. They ingest, integrate, and propagate data across different tools, dashboards, and user environments. Once a dataset is pulled in, ensuring that all derivatives and copies are fully purged is both technically demanding and audit-intensive. If future court orders or regulations require near-perfect traceability and deletability of sensitive data, Palantir may have to invest heavily in additional controls, which can both strengthen its competitive moat and increase its compliance costs. In the best-case scenario, Palantir turns this into a selling point, positioning itself as the partner that can provide provable, auditable data lineage. In the worst-case scenario, persistent doubts about whether data can truly be purged make regulators more hesitant to allow such systems in the first place. NPR News highlights another development that should catch investors' attention. The Department of Justice is now asking the court to expand its order and allow IC to receive Medicaid data on a broader category of non-citizens, potentially including all immigrants who are not legal permanent residents, U.S. citizens, or holders of another form of permanent status. If granted, that expansion would increase the scope and volume of data feeding into IC systems like Palantir's Elite. From a narrow revenue standpoint, more data and more use cases generally support higher contract values, more modules, and longer-term engagements. But simultaneously, expanding the population under surveillance increases the political volatility. It becomes easier for critics to portray Palantir as a central infrastructure for mass deportation efforts, including against people with tenuous but lawful presence. Investors must weigh whether this kind of growth is robust and sustainable, or whether it invites a future backlash that could be much more severe, ranging from state-level refusals to cooperate, to federal legislation limiting the use of health and benefits data for enforcement. According to NPR, the Democratic state attorneys general have seized on ICE's own admissions to argue against granting broader access. They write that ICE's difficulty in even identifying which Medicaid records it currently holds undermines the agency's claim that it should be trusted with more data. Each new violation of the court's order, they say, makes it harder to assure Medicaid providers, enrollees, and the public that their healthcare data will remain private and secure. For Palantir shareholders, this language should be read as an early warning of a potential convergence between privacy law, healthcare data regulation, and immigration policy. If public outrage grows around the idea that medical or benefits data is quietly feeding deportation pipelines, lawmakers may seek bright-line prohibitions. Palantir sits exactly where these streams converge. It does not collect the data, but it builds the tools that make that data actionable. The NPR report notes that Palantir did not immediately respond to questions about whether it had deleted the January dataset after receiving it from ICE, and the Department of Homeland Security did not immediately comment on the transfer. Instead, according to a declaration by a California Deputy Attorney General, when plaintiffs asked what steps federal officials took to ensure Palantir and other contractors had purged the data, the response referenced a Microsoft Teams chat where the data had been shared. The government said the data was deleted from that chat, and discovery documents apparently show a transcript of IC personnel asking Palantir to delete the file. From an operational and governance standpoint, this is a key point. Sharing large, sensitive datasets through collaboration tools like Teams, and then relying on chat-level deletion, does not align with the public's expectation of robust data governance for healthcare and immigration information. Investors should infer two things. First, there may be a mismatch between the cutting-edge technical capabilities of Palantir's platform and the day-to-day operational practices of its government partners. Even the most sophisticated architecture cannot fully compensate for basic process flaws, such as informal file sharing via chat channels. Second, as scrutiny grows, Palantir might need to devote more effort to educating and constraining how its government clients move data around its ecosystem. That means more compliance training, stricter workflows, and possibly contract terms that limit ad hoc data transfers. All of that could add friction to deployments and might slow down the rapid expansion that investors have become accustomed to in some public sector accounts. There is also a broader brand and ESG angle here. Many institutional investors now apply environmental, social, and governance screens to their portfolios. A company that is repeatedly spotlighted in stories about deportation technology and mishandled health data might face exclusion from certain funds or meet higher costs of capital if sentiment turns. On the other hand, Palantir supporters often argue that the company provides transparency, audit trails, and accountability to government operations that would otherwise be opaque. In that narrative, tools like Palantir's software can help ensure that enforcement actions are based on accurate information and lawful criteria, rather than manual lists or ad hoc spreadsheets. But that argument works only if Palantir and its partners can convincingly show that improper data is identified, quarantined, and removed quickly and reliably. According to NPR, Judge Chabria has already signaled his impatience. In an April hearing, he warned that if the federal government could not be sufficiently careful with this data, it would lose the ability to use the information for deportation efforts at all. For Palantir, that warning should be interpreted as a potential binary risk in specific use cases, either demonstrate strong data discipline in partnership with agencies, or risk seeing entire data sources cut off by judicial order. How should a long-term Palantir investor digest all of this? First, recognize that this is a governance and risk management story, not simply a contract headline. Palantir's edge comes from solving hard data problems for powerful institutions. That edge is valuable precisely because it operates in areas where stakes are high. But high stakes cut both ways. Every misstep by a partner agency becomes a stress test for Palantir's own trustworthiness. Second, consider the diversity of Palantir's revenue base. The company has been pushing hard into commercial and international markets, from manufacturing optimization to financial crime detection to defense analytics with allied governments. That diversification can help cushion the blow if a particular U.S. enforcement-related workflow is curtailed or heavily constrained. However, episodes like this can still shape the narrative around Palantir as a company whose core DNA is government surveillance and enforcement. Third, think about competitive positioning. If public pressure tightens the compliance requirements for government data analytics platforms, smaller or less sophisticated competitors may struggle to keep up. Palantir could, in theory, leverage its resources to become the gold standard provider for secure, auditable public sector analytics. That would turn regulatory burden into a competitive moat. But achieving that outcome requires visible leadership on privacy, deletion controls, and ethical boundaries, not just technical prowess. Finally, investors should watch for several future signals. Watch how this court case evolves. Does the judge ultimately revoke or further limit ICE's access to Medicaid data, or does he accept new safeguards and allow an expansion? Any direct restrictions on data use for deportation could indirectly limit the growth trajectory of tools like Elite. Watch for any public guidance or policy statements from Palantir itself. Does the company articulate clear principles about what kinds of data it is willing to analyze, and under what conditions? Does it invest in more robust verifiable deletion and audit tools that it can showcase to policymakers? Watch state-level responses. States control much of the Medicaid infrastructure and may react to this controversy by adding their own constraints on data sharing with federal agencies, which could indirectly affect how much data ultimately flows into Palantir-powered systems. In the short term, the market reaction to this kind of story may be muted or overshadowed by macro factors and quarterly results. In the long term, however, repeated controversies around health data, immigration enforcement, and privacy can shape how regulators, partners, and the broader public view Palantir. For risk-tolerant investors who believe Palantir can navigate these challenges, this kind of episode highlights why the company can earn premium margins. It operates where technical difficulty and political sensitivity intersect. For more conservative investors, this story reinforces the argument that Palantir is not just a software vendor, but a deeply political actor whose fortunes will ebb and flow with the regulatory and ethical debates of the day. According to NPR, the immediate question in this case is whether Palantir and other contractors have actually purged the improperly shared Medicaid data and whether the federal government can convince the court that it deserves broader access. The bigger question for investors is whether Palantir can evolve its governance, transparency, and communication fast enough to keep regulators comfortable while still growing its mission-critical role inside government. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you found this analysis helpful, consider subscribing and sharing it with other investors who follow Palantir and the broader data analytics space.